Good morning. My name is Kim Nowak. Welcome to our third service of the Fifth Sunday Fellowship. We are an experimental worship collaborative made up of 5 women and 3 congregations. I represent the UU congregation of Petoskey, Michigan. Brenda Scheirig and Jennifer Halperin represent East Suburban UU congregation near Pittsburgh. Shannon Resch represents the UU congregation of Gettysburg. And Lisa Napier, our organizer, is a UU who comes from Southern Maryland. We began during the pandemic in late spring of 2022 as a larger group of interested congregations, meeting, collaborating, and planning for these Fifth Sundays series of services. Our goal is to address some of the worship needs of small congregations. Those of us who comprise the Fifth Sunday Fellowship are ready for a new creative spark to ignite the tired and sometimes discouraged programming committees of our congregations. Our collaboration has helped us to imagine what church might look like in the future, with more sharing and blurring of the lines between congregations. Our congregation in Petoskey is already collaborating on one Sunday a month with 2 other Michigan-based congregations. And we have made many new friends and gained energy from this relationship. It's a great concept. We 5 representatives have formed a covenant to bring our best to creating collaborative worship for the 5 Fifth Sundays of 2023. We welcome your feedback, both in the chat and afterward with your congregational representative. While we come from different places to these shared, real, and virtual spaces, we are united in our principles, and we share a common quest for the ideas and experiences that make meaning of our lives. We realize the format of our UU principles might be changing, but the core concepts behind them remain the same. We're happy to bring the principles to you in these Fifth Sunday services, and we thank you for being here this morning to participate in this collaborative worship experiment. Today's sermon revolves around principles 5 and 6, and will be led by Petoskey's part-time minister, Reverend Alice Diebel, who's coming to us from Dayton, Ohio this morning. We are truly a far-reaching collaboration. And I want to share with you one thing that Reverend Alice reminds us with considering our Zoom capabilities and our technology. She says we're striving for connection, not perfection. So please excuse any technical difficulties that we may have as we go along. May you feel welcome here, and may we all worship together as friends. Now we'll have opening words and the chalice lighting by Shannon Resch.
Our opening words today come to us from Laura Thompson, lead minister at Minnesota Valley UU Fellowship. Across the distance, the light from within me shines, sending love to all. Across the distance, your light is fuel that warms me and helps me keep my own light burning. Together, we keep the flame of community burning bright. Now, here at our Little Red Church in Gettysburg, we invite everyone to join in a unison affirmation as we light our chalice. Ours was handcrafted by a founding member of UUG with sculpted flowers on the base representing the 4 seasons of the year. We have summer facing forward for our congregation. Would you please join us with these words that are on your screen? May the light of this flame and the weight of our words inspire us to heal and not harm, to help and not hinder, to serve the spirit of life in loving affection and trusting hope.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Napier. The land acknowledgement is adapted from the land acknowledgement of the University of Pittsburgh, the Maryland State Arts Council, and each congregation who joins us. As we begin, let us acknowledge those who have walked before us on these lands we now call ours. The Unitarian Universalists of Petoskey, Michigan, gather on lands that were once home to the Anishinaabe, Menominee, Otiti, Shakawin, and Odawa tribes. The Unitarian Universalists of East Suburban Church of Murraysville, Pennsylvania, meet on the ancestral territory of the Adena, Hopewell, and Monongahela people, who were later joined by refugees of the Delaware, Shawnee, Haudenosaunee, and other tribes. The Unitarian Universalists of Gettysburg convene on unceded indigenous land, including the traditional homelands of the Susquehannock, Conestoga, Seneca, and the Haudenosaunee, Shawnee Confederacy, Lenni Lenape, and the Shawnee Nations. The UUs in Southern Maryland convene on land of longstanding kinship with its first peoples, the Accahannock Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Choptico Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nasu Wawash. I'm sorry. Nasu Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway, Conroy Tribe. They're still here.
Breathe. It's a powerful moment. Thank you, Lisa.
Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Yakagani River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. Called by something greater than ourselves, we choose to acknowledge that Miami Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship sits on the lands of the Pascaquia, Lenape, Miamaa, Osage, and Shawnee nations and peoples. At the convergence of 5 rivers, the Miami Valley was an important economic, cultural, and spiritual center for the First Nations, attracting peoples from across the continent. We acknowledge that all of these tribes and so many others were forced off their original land and displaced by European colonists. We acknowledge as well the native languages and cultures that have been severely damaged or lost due to forced removal, assimilation, and erasure. We honor the original caretakers of our region and uplift their historic, unique, and enduring relationship with the lands which are their ancestral territories. We pay our respects to their elders and their past, present, and future people, community, and culture. While we cannot change the past, we commit to continued gratitude for the gifts of nature, along with ongoing respect, care, and stewardship of the land, each other, and future generations. We are committed to learning and supporting Indigenous communities in our regions today and in the future. This acknowledgement is neither a beginning nor an end. It sits in a history overflowing with broken promises, lies, and violence. Our shared faith calls us to name this truth as one small effort toward healing the wounds of our past and building a shared future marked by true equality, equity, and peace. May it be so. May we make it so. Thank you.
I'm Brenda Shiring. As Unitarian Universalists, we strive to work toward spiritual wholeness through actions that seek to accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions. One way we begin this work is by welcoming the voices of our Black and Brown siblings into our worship services. Our sister congregation, Unitarian Universalist Church of Gettysburg, sets aside a time for this at every service, calling it a Blue Note, in recognition of the work of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, BLUU or Blue. Today, we of the East Suburban UU Church in Murraysville would like to share in that tradition by bringing you the words of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who lived from 1825 to 1911, was an African-American writer, lecturer, and political activist who promoted abolition, civil rights, women's rights, and temperance. She helped found or held high office in several national progressive organizations. She is best remembered today for her poetry and fiction, which preached moral uplift and counseled the oppressed on how to free themselves from their demoralized state. She was a Unitarian as well as a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. This is her most famous poem, "Bury Me Not in a Land of Slaves." Make me a grave where'er you will, in a lowly plain, on a lofty hill. Make it among earth's humblest graves, but not in a land where men are slaves. I could not rest if around my grave I heard the steps of a trembling slave. His shadow above my silent tomb would make it a place of fearful gloom. I could not rest if I heard the tread of a coffle gang to the shambles led, and the mother's shriek of wild despair rise like a curse on the trembling air. I could not sleep if I saw the lash drinking her blood at each fearful gash, and I saw her babes torn from her breast like trembling doves from their parent nest. I'd shudder and start if I heard the bay of bloodhounds seizing their human prey, and I heard the captive plead in vain as they bound afresh his galling chain. If I saw young girls from their mother's arms bartered and sold for their youthful charms, my eye would flash with a mournful flame, my death-pale cheek grow red with shame. I would sleep, dear friends, where bloated might can rob no man of his dearest right. My rest shall be calm in any grave where none can call his brother a slave. I ask no monument proud and high to arrest the gaze of the passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves.
Thank you, Brenda. Now, after that powerful poem, we will extend our hand of friendship to our neighbors. And if you would like to join us by turning on your video, if you're comfortable in doing that, please wave to your neighbors on Zoom and in your congregations. Say hello to each other. Love all the hands waving. Thank you so much. We will have our opening hymn. It is Love Will Guide Us, number 131 in your hymnal. Now we will have our time for all ages. This is it is called UU Kids for a Livable Planet, and the children speak in different volumes. So I encourage you to turn your volume up at certain times. And I encourage you to turn on your closed captioning to fully understand the words they're saying.
Protecting bees is a very important thing. There are so many things that bees can bring. They can do so much more than get nectar from flowers. They fly around and pollinate for hours. Nobody can stop this amazing power. Their population is slowly going down. We have to do something before there's none in this town. So let's get together and help the bees, and then we can live happily. Protect animals. You can eat fruits, plants, and vegetables. Help animals, don't eat them. Birds die from factory pollution. Then other animals would die without birds.
I need a birdhouse that is going to take care of birds and other animals.
So I'm going to do a vegetable garden and got a butterfly.
I drew a picture of like a pretty earth, and then if you take it off, then there's the polluted earth. And if we keep on polluting, then there won't be any natural things or streams that we can go visit.
I'm Sebastian. I'd like to tell you about what I want Maryland to be like. See, last weekend I went to a national park, and I went camping there with my friends on this island. And I got to see something called this nature, and the water was clean. It was so clean, and we were able to canoe there. And there was like a bald eagle's nest not too far from us. We saw them fishing and flying around, and they were even raising their young inside this beautiful, beautiful place. And this is the Maryland that I want to grow up in. This is the Maryland that I want to live in. This is the Maryland that I want you to vote on.
Please pass the laws to save the planet.
To keep the environment healthy,
So let's get together and help the bees.
the polluted earth.
I'm a UU kid for a livable planet.
Vote for a better future.
Thank you.
Jen Halpern and I will be hosting today's Time for Joys and Concerns here at the East Suburban Unitarian Universalist Church in Murraysville. On a typical Sunday, we offer time to our congregation to individually share their joys and concerns. Today, with our many congregations joining together, we will do things a bit differently. However, if you have a joy or sorrow you wish to share within this beloved community, please feel free to type it in the chat for everyone to share. Ours is a welcoming community where we find connection, a spiritual community where we find meaning. Ours is a sharing community where our joys are amplified, a caring community where our concerns and sorrows are lessened. We take this time to reflect on our joys and concerns, our joys and sorrows, and acknowledge the mutual support of our community. We drop stones into water, knowing that like the ripples this causes, so do our words convey the sentiments of our hearts and minds. For the joys and concerns held in the hearts of the congregation at East Suburban Unitarian Universalist Church in Murraysville, Pennsylvania, we place a stone. For the joys and concerns held in the hearts of those at the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Petoskey in Michigan, we place a stone. For the joys and concerns held in the hearts of the Unitarian Universalist of Southern Maryland, we place a stone. For the joys and sorrows held in the hearts of the congregation at the Unitarian Universalists of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, we place a stone. For the joys and sorrows held in the hearts of Unitarian Universalists and their congregations joining us again, we place a stone. Welcome. For the joys and concerns of those joining us for the first time, we place a stone. Please use your imaginations as we place a boulder for all the concerns weighing heavily on hearts today. For all the joys lifting our spirits today, we place a leaf. For all the blessings we have to count, we bring a beautiful shell. May we remember those who have spoken aloud in private spaces, those they have named, and those we hold in silence in our hearts. Reverend Alice.
Will you join me, please, in a moment of prayer or meditation? Living Spirit that moves among us and within us, we're grateful for the opportunity to be together in this space, both virtual and shared. For all who are facing the pain of loss or illness, we turn our hearts toward one another in this loving community. Deaths that have passed, losses, healing from illness. May we honor all these sorrows together. May we also lift up the joys of birthdays, gatherings together. May we turn our faces outward for those who are unhoused, for all who face violence and oppression. Let us turn our attention to them. We lift up the Community Unitarian Universalist Church of Plano, Texas. On last Sunday, it was the target of a firebomb attack. No one was injured, fortunately. It's being investigated as a hate crime against this liberal congregation in an atmosphere of fear. May we have the courage to hold fast to our vision of justice. It is good to be together. Amen.
We will now have our offertory slide. We ask that at this time you contribute generously to your church or your cause to support its mission.
So many friends who had to say goodbye. So many broken hearts struck open wide. The sadness flows like rivers deep inside. We need each other in these trying times. So circle around each other side by side. And may we heal these wounds together.
I'd like to take this time to introduce Reverend Alice Diebel. She serves as the Petoskey congregation as a part-time contract minister. She lives in Dayton, Ohio, so we have that part of the country represented here today as well. Reverend Alice also serves her community as a minister of people affected by prison and re-entry. Prior to being a minister, she worked for the Kettering Foundation, focusing on the question, what does it take for democracy to work as it should? A rather important question for our service today. Reverend Alice.
Good morning. So good to be with you. I'd like to begin this morning with a reading from The Free Church by Alice Blair Wesley, a UU minister and historian. She includes some quotes from the early years of our history, where the first church of Dedham, Massachusetts was founded in 1638 by a small group of English colonists known as Puritans. When they arrived in the so-called wilderness, they had to design a town government so they could make decisions about how to legally and fairly divide up the fields for crops and create lots for houses. She writes, then, with pens built for their animals, initial crops seen to, houses up, furniture unpacked or freshly pegged together, and so on, they began to think of founding a church. But they had been working so hard, they hadn't really had time to get to know each other very well, much less talk about what kind of church they should establish. To get to know one another and to approach gently, slowly, some very profound and personal religious issues among them, they set up a series of weekly neighborhood meetings, lovingly to discourse and consult together and prepare for spiritual communion in church society, that we might be further acquainted with the spiritual tempers and gifts of one another. Anybody in town who wanted was welcome to attend. They adopted a few simple rules for their meetings, such as what to discuss next week, how to give everyone a chance to speak or to raise reasoned questions. And they were to speak without arguing. They met and talked from the winter of 1637 until after the church was founded in November of 1638. I love this story because it connects how democracy was envisioned as a people's decision-making process, bolstered by talk and understanding. Embedded in the founding of our nation was the sense that in order to be fair in how we lived together, we needed to talk and talk before deciding. In those early years, the church was the community's government. And these Puritans knew from their experience in England that for the church to function peaceably and freely over time, it must be part of a larger society where justice and reasonable laws can be freely and effectively voiced without suppression. Now, this very well-researched history ignores some things, such as the removal of Native people and their genocide, as well as the arrival of enslaved people from Africa in 1619. And in a sermon on justice, I just can't let that slide. But what this partial history does make clear is that as institutions are being formed from the church to the town council, talking and considering multiple points of view is a critical movement toward both justice and democracy, our Unitarian Universalist fifth and sixth principles. If you're just new with us today, the fifth principle is the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. And the sixth principle is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. It seems timely, doesn't it, to discuss justice and democracy We observe around us, if we're paying attention, people using anti-democratic methods of decision-making and taking actions that lead to injustice and removal of human rights. Most notable, thanks to television, are the injustices and risks to democracy at a national scale, from the murder of George Floyd by the police to the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. We see it in the efforts to erode voting rights. We see it in the efforts to take away rights from women. We see it in the efforts to oppress BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and the LGBTQ+ population. Justice and democracy are under constant threat, and we need to be vigilant everywhere, from the national to the local levels. And perhaps the local level is most important and often goes unnoticed. How did we get to this place of authoritarianism and discrimination? Weren't we making real progress in the world? Didn't it seem like we were making important changes to make the nation fairer? Black people and women got the vote. Jim Crow laws ended. Schools became integrated. I mean, don't we say the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice? Don't we say onward and upward forever? Well, it doesn't feel that way to me. It feels more like a push and pull. But there is reason for hope. We also have to be realistic about the need for constant vigilance. Perhaps one of the strongest voices of the 20th century on this realistic work for democracy and justice was theologian and ethicist Reinhold Niebuhr. You may know him as the author of the Serenity Prayer, which is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Realistic. Niebuhr puts reality squarely in the center of his book called The Children of Light and the Children of Darkness. Now, I try to avoid using language like dark and black to describe bad things. These are words from his time, so I will be substituting dark with self-interested. Niebuhr wrote, "Humankind's capacity for justice makes democracy possible." I'm going to say it again. Humankind's capacity for justice makes democracy possible. But, he adds, humankind's inclination toward injustice makes democracy necessary. In other words, we humans want to be fair, and we can be fair, and we have the ability to use democracy as the means to create fairness. But realistically, we humans are inclined to be corrupt and look out for ourselves, me, my, mine. It is democracy that can bring us back from the brink of injustice. And for democracy to realistically deal with injustice, it requires our examination, our critique of the actions we take, the reasons for those actions, and the consequences that result from our actions. In this era of rising authoritarianism and serious erosion of rights, the statement comes alive in ways that we need to consider. The challenges we face are real and growing. Niebuhr wrote that book in the 1940s in the immediate aftermath of World War II. He was highly critical of liberals who thought everything could be fixed and that we would indeed keep going onward and upward forever. He called these liberals who followed the idea of the social gospel the children of light. Now, the social gospel was a theological perspective from the early 20th century that all human-created institutions we create could deal with the injustices we see around us. The children of light were naive, he argued. Evil and corruption is too entrenched to give way easily to some new anti-poverty program. Niebuhr described evil as selfish self-centeredness, I love that definition. It's taking what you need or want without considering the impact on anybody else. It is a very narrow self-interest. He recognized that the human tendency to corrupt the good was present in government, in business, even in churches. The realism that Niebuhr argues for is in resurgence now by others. In our contemporary times, the UU minister Nancy MacDonald Ladd also worries about a faith that might be just too optimistic, too hopeful. She wrote in her book, After the Good News, "In my early years among the liberal Protestants, I soon found that I was not, in fact, the only realist spy among the optimists. My fellow students and young preachers, many of them Gen Xers like myself, grappled with similar questions. We wondered just what it meant to uphold the bright blessings of the social gospel optimism that gave our movements power, while still reconciling the truth of our lives and the world around us." Gen X came into being after the attacks on the World Trade Towers on 9/11 and the subsequent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and our own torture of prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. Perhaps the fear and evil of the times, along with the intractable issues we face like climate change and mass shootings, created a more wary and suspicious tone among that generation. And they, like us all, then faced the violent threat to democracy on January 6th. I think a little realism is in order. Niebuhr says the grave defect in democratic theory is that it has not really accepted the facts of our history. He says it is necessary to face the truth of democratic life. He wrote, "The preservation of a democratic civilization requires the wisdom of the serpent and the harmlessness of the dove. The children of light must be armed with the wisdom of the children of self-interest, but remain free of that malice. They must know the power of self-interest in human society without giving it any moral justification. They must have the wisdom in order that they may harness and restrain self-interest, individual and collective, for the sake of the community." This kind of realism is really hard, especially among people of privilege. Nancy Ladd wrote, "It is difficult to preach that all things shall grow into harmony with the divine when things seem to fall apart all around us. It is difficult to proclaim that this beautiful harmony will be created by the church itself when the church remains centered on the experiences and expectations of people who have spent far too long at the center of power." In other words, it's hard to give up our power and self-interest, especially if we are not connected to the experiences of those suffering from injustice. And I see real movement in this Fifth Sunday Fellowship in acknowledging Native peoples before us and the enslavement of Africans. Where does all this leave us? How do we carry on if we aren't optimistic? Well, the realism of democracy and justice can and perhaps should start locally. Much like Alice Blair Wesley's history tells us, we need to create the institutions that will push toward fairness by talking and thinking together democratically. Niebuhr says we have to have awareness and constant vigilance because we are inclined to injustice. We also know that even with that inclination to injustice, our ability to work for justice through democratic means is possible. Difficult, but possible. So maybe realism has some hopefulness and optimism after all. If we look at all the school boards around the country as an example, we can see an opportunity for the children of light to ignore what's actually happening, and the children of self-interest to take advantage of the times we are in and hold on to power. I want to use that as a local example, and there's one that's been in the national news just to show how firmly rooted injustice can be. A disturbing case in point comes out of Southlake, Texas. It's reported on NBC.com. A Black family, Robin and Frank Cornish and their 4 children, moved to Southlake and immediately found the wide open spaces appealing. But all was not paradise. The school had created a new diversity council and a code of conduct in response to racist slurs and microaggressions in the school. There was an immediate backlash. Within days of the release of the code of conduct, outraged parents, most of them white, formed a political action committee and began packing the school board meetings to voice their strong opposition. They raised $100,000 and backed candidates who opposed diversity plans. Some denounced the diversity plans as Marxist and leftist indoctrination designed to fix a problem that doesn't exist. The opponents said that they too wanted all students to feel safe at the school, but they argued that the district's plan would instead create diversity police and it amounted to reverse racism against white children. They were not at all nice in their opposition, and there was no talking going on. They argued that the code of conduct already prohibited bullying and that instruction in diversity only perpetuates differences. Some flatly denied that systemic racism exists and argued that children should not be taught to see race. At a public hearing, Robin Cornish addressed the school board. She said, "The scars are there, the wounds are permanent." She told the board as some in the audience wiped away their tears. "You all have to take a stand. You've got to change this curriculum. You've got to change the tone in this town." More parents followed her, each sharing stories of racist bullying that traumatized their children with little or no consequences for the offending students. After all, might that hurt their futures? Michelle Moore, a school board trustee, remembered feeling a mix of anger and shame as she listened. She had no idea so many children felt like they'd been bullied at school based on their race. How could she have been so oblivious? For her, the goal had been to not only protect students of color from discrimination, but to ensure that every graduate leaves with a basic understanding of how to be kind and respectful in an increasingly diverse society. But kindness did not win the day. Instead of accountability, the townspeople denied the problem or tried to hide it. Niebuhr would have predicted that response. Justice is created on the backs of these local communities and towns. Children of light who see the racist incidents as the behaviors of a few misguided individuals take their eye off the ball, while the children of self-interest swoop in when they see an opening to maintain the status quo, power and wealth in the hands of white folks who already have it to protect their kids from any harm. Self-interest. So you see, the families did not spend their time getting to know one another before making decisions. Imagine if they had talked and talked across their differences until they really saw one another. And if that won't work, and it might not in our busy world, then we need to insist on accountability for oppressive actions. We cannot just have justice when bullying and oppression are ignored. It takes a toll on all people in the community. The Cornishes eventually left Southlake because of it. We can count on people behaving badly. So we truly need a democracy where people talk together and figure out how to structure the schools. And if we can't talk and listen to one another and face the realities of the situation, it will be harder to get there. But we must also be realistic that many people who fear they might lose something will not want to talk. And so we organize, we build relationships, and we hold people accountable if needed. Is there a school board in your town that needs you? If you can't get people talking, then we need to rise up with the strength that the opposition has without the violent means. I saw this wonderful meme on Facebook. Vote as if your skin is not white, your parents need medical care, your spouse is an immigrant, your land is on fire, your child is transgender, your house is flooded, your sister is a victim of gun violence, your brother is gay, and your water is unsafe. Because privilege has no place in an election, but empathy does. Go forth with empathy in your hearts for a just and democratic world. Amen.
Our closing words are by retired UU minister Tom Shade. My friends, there is a power at work in the universe. It works through human hands, but it was not made by human hands. It is a creative, sustaining, and transforming power, and we can trust that power with our lives and with our ministries. It will sustain us whenever we take a stand on the side of love, whenever we take a stand for peace and justice, whenever we take a risk. Trust in that power. We are together held by that power. Would you please join me in our unison response as we extinguish our chalice? Sure, they were up there. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and in our hands until we are together again. Now, if you were all joined in our little red church here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania right now, you'd be invited to stand as you are able, form a circle, and join hands. and together we sing this parting song, Safe Passage, to one another. During the pandemic, UUG had the opportunity to record this under the guidance and leadership of Leah Morris. Once the music ends, our service truly begins. Please join us again for the Fifth Sunday Fellowship on October 29th, and we will leave Zoom open for any chat or comments for a few moments. So UUG, let's do what we do.
May you have safe passage. May you have safe passage. May you have safe passage. Safe passage on your way. Safe passage on your way, dear brother. Safe passage on your way, dear sister. Safe passage on your way, sweet children. Safe passage on your way. May you have safe passage. May you have safe passage. May you have safe passage. Safe passage on your way. Safe passage on your way, dear brother. Safe passage on your way, dear sister. Safe passage on your way, sweet children. Safe passage on your way. May you have safe passage. May you have safe passage. May you have safe passage. Safe passage on your way.